Hi folks, my name is RUCHIR JAJOO. I'm from St. Xavier's College and I've been selected in the top 30 of Federal Bank Speak for India. Ladies and gentlemen, let us have a conversation. A conversation not about the society, a conversation not about yourself, a conversation about your sense of freedom. Every single time we've analyzed this entire ascent of human civilization, we come to believe that every single entity that went on to define this civilization, transform its social fabric, whether that be technology, whether that be an economy, whether that be education, we had a definitive approach to understanding our relationship with that entity. But it's very sad to see that one of the things that is extremely important, that has come to be extremely important in today's world, we fail to have that conversation with it. 1,000 years back, when civilization was not as complex, when civilization was not as diverse, and its needs were not as diverse, it did not warrant the need of a government. But right now, with extremely diversified political doctrines, extremely diversified economic doctrines, extremely diversified philosophical doctrines, needs, wants, aspirations, everything changing, it warrants the need of a government. But we never had a conversation about what we want our relationship to be with the government. A good example of this would be when we welcome technology to change our lives forever with open arms, we also had a conversation with technology to make ourselves aware of the fact that regardless of how much we want to accept all things techie, we also have to be cognizant of the fact of its potential harms. Every time we use our phones, we are also cognizant of the fact that we don't want the phones to own us. There's a very famous quote from Fight Club, which I think perfectly encapsulates the spirit of what I'm trying to say today. Things you own should not end up owning you. And this conversation is extremely important to have in the context of the government today. We have an entire generation growing up with a sense of entitlement that their quality of life, that their source of happiness is controlled entirely by the government. They believe that if there are 100 reasons they need to be happy, 80 of them is a direct cause and effect, a direct byproduct of the governmental policies, which is absolutely not true. And more than just not being true, it is extremely disempowering for an entire country's youth force to grow up with this notion. The conversation I want to have today is we need to reevaluate our relationship with the government for one simple reason: to get back the power with us, to take control over what we have control over. When we think or when we ascribe all of the reasons that we need to be happy on the activities of an external entity, we lose control over what we can do within our own selves. The government is not the sole custodian of your happiness, regardless of how many people tell you that, regardless of how many times society reinforces the illusion that you are not in control and the government determines practically every aspect of your life. It is not true, because for every example or instance that you give me of the government disempowering someone from getting what they had and another government being able to empower, I will give you 100 examples of people, despite that disempowerment, were able to do it and you were not. This is not a conversation about not blaming the government or supporting any government. We definitely have to hold the government accountable for what it's supposed to do. We definitely have a North Star that we compare the government to. But we also have to be cognizant of the fact that the accountability that we enforce upon the government should not be a distraction from the accountability that we are bound to impose on ourselves. In this process of holding the government accountable, we lose cognizance of the fact that practically all aspects of our life are still very much in our control. And regardless of how the environments are structured around us, the government remains to be a facilitator, not a provider. And this paradigm shift from believing that government is a provider, the source custodian of your happiness, and the primary reason for all unhappiness in your life, to believing that government is a facilitator and I still have control over all the things that I can practically control, is extremely empowering. If you've made it this far in the video and if you think that I'm speaking some sense, or if you relate to what I'm saying on any level, I would urge you to vote for me. Log on to www.speakforindia.com. It's organized by the Federal Bank, and vote for me. Thank you.